There are some families that after the event, it's always going to be fight at home because maybe the guy spent all the money. He was spraying money, forgot himself.
Yes.
And then he gets home and says, hey, Baba Lati, where is the remaining money that we say we're going to use to pay our school fees? And Baba Lati said, I sprayed all the money at the party yesterday, so we have to wait. We can't pay school fees anymore.
Said I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my brother, he go better, even better. Oh, na, 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 na. I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my sister, he go better, even better. Oh.
This is episode 7 of the Better Informed Immigrant podcast. And today I'm joined with my co-host, KD. How's it going today?
Pretty good, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you for asking. It's been an interesting week, work-wise, and today we made a change. Actually, was it today or did we start that last week? Did we change the recording day?
Last week.
Oh, okay. So this is the second time. So it just felt as if it was a new day or new change, I should say. But it's been pretty good so far. So tell me what's going on your side. What are we talking about today?
From my side, it's been an interesting week too. There's an ongoing preparation for a burial in Nigeria, which has a mixed bag of festivities and spending, and also the debate between the idea of spending for events or not spending for events, the economic value of really going overboard for events, and what it means actually to spend at events. Is it for prestige or to be honored or to be remembered? I'm just really trying to break down the value, even though it's a cultural thing too, to some extent for us Africans. Yeah, it has its cultural value. I just don't know, even as we've evolved and there is more understanding of how the world works, and also the understanding of situations in terms of different families trying to balance either their finances and life after the event. Gone are those days where we do all that spending at the event, and then the day after you wake up to reality, I'm like, I don't want to look at my bank account right now. So that's one thing that I think it's worth discussing, and also probably what getting like opinions of other people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. To give a little bit more context to that, right? So we are based in the US, and when we're talking about funerals or burials, it tends to be a very solemn event. And what I mean by that is it doesn't matter what the age of the deceased is, right? You would typically go to, if you were a Christian, you would go to some kind of church service. There would be a minister that would preach, or there may just be people saying some things about the individual. And then from there, you will typically go to the burial ground to actually bury the deceased. And some people will have some kind of reception afterwards, but the reception is usually not really full meals. It's very rare to have full meals. Some people might. But if you do these things, it's usually done on a very small scale, right? You're not like closing down the block or anything like that. You're inviting friends or family or people that either knew the individual or the individual touched their lives, and they just come and celebrate that person, or, share in the sorrow and the loss of the family members that remain, right? And that is different when you look at it from our understanding or our experience in Nigeria, right? So if you're doing a burial for somebody who is up there in age, it becomes some kind of grand party, right? So you're closing down the block. It's like you have to make it so big, and it's not unusual for you to have hundreds and hundreds of people to attend this tent. And I'm very curious about how many of them actually knew the individual, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing too is like, none of these people that you're inviting are bringing anything with them. They're just coming to your thing. They don't even come to the burial ground. They're only coming to the party to come and eat your food and drink your drinks. And it's really a grand party, and it could be a multi-day party. So the question I would ask, and is what you were saying, is it worth it, right? Because one thing that we think about is you're honoring the person, right? So some people say you're honoring the person, you're celebrating his life. That's why you're throwing this grand party. I guess I'm of the opinion, the person is already dead. Obviously, the person doesn't care. If you wanted to celebrate the person or honor him or her while they were alive, not necessarily after they're dead, and throw grand party that basically have people that don't care about him or didn't even know him coming there to come and eat and drink. And some of them have also dance parties and things like that. So that's one aspect of it. A different aspect is to say, hey, there are so many stakeholders that come into play that feel that they should have a say in how the ceremony should be done, right? So if this person was religious, it could be the church, it could be other things. And usually those things are not necessarily, let's just do some simple mass or some simple service. It's usually a lot more elaborate than that. And I guess the question that I would say is, for the people that are left behind, this is the family that is still alive. They may not necessarily have any ties or relationship with some of the stakeholders, right? So it's like, why should we cater, especially if we are going to be the ones to pay for this thing? Why should we cater to your whims or your desires if we have no relationship with you? And we will have no relationship with you past this event, right? So if you said, okay, you know what, you're doing this, but now we are now joined as one bigger family. Okay, so maybe you can say, I want to do that because I want that relationship or network. But if it's going to be, we do this thing and then everybody goes their separate ways, like, why should I care about you, right? That's one question that one could ask. I certainly don't agree with the approach that I see and that I've experienced, right? I think it seems a little wasteful. I think that's number one. Yeah, you are spending a lot of financial resources for something that's going to be a 2 or 3 day event. And after that, it's gone, right? There is no investment here that you're saying you're making an investment and going to pay dividends later. So I think that's one part. I think the other part too, again, goes back to, if I were a stakeholder, if I were one of the family members that were left behind, if somebody comes to me and have that conversation, the question I'm going to ask is, do I know you? That's number one. And number two is, why should I listen to you? And I think what happens is that because of maybe the culture, or because maybe some family members are embedded in that culture, right? You kind of have a split within the family, because there's some family members that says, oh, this is how we do it. This is how it should be done. If we didn't do it this way, it's not right. Right? Because that's their exposure. That's all they know. And then you have some other family members who maybe are seeing a different way of doing things and say, hey, it doesn't really make sense for us to do it this particular way. And I don't think anybody would have this dispute if people could pay for it by themselves. But typically you have to overextend to be able to pay for these things.
Correct. And I think aside the economy of this, there's also the anatomy of like a typical African party. And for me, true life story, part of the reason why I excuse myself from anything that has to do with like family event is because I've been scarred by it, and I have like bad memories of like just attending these parties. And early on, I just really found a way of escaping the parties by just going to church. So when we do have these parties and someone asks, oh, where is he? I say, oh, he's in church. So after a while, people just got used to hearing that I'm in church. So they never asked anymore. So everyone just forgot about me. So whenever we're having the family event, people don't even think about, does he exist? Because they know the answer they'll get is in church. I could be working somewhere, but because they've gotten used to just hearing that I'm in church, they stopped asking. But the reason why I was so over it was it's like a movie. So when you attend one of this, and maybe because I'm a deep thinker, like when I go to places, I just go so deep into every aspect of what is happening around me, and it becomes a movie. It's like a movie of you're watching this group of people on the other side of the party space that are maybe gossiping about the other people on the other side of the party stage. And you have this group of people who their focus is, I need to get as much food as I can today. And there's also the group of like, I just don't like this guy, so I'm going to show them I don't like them by aggravating them or by it's just people just plan to show up and do several things. But you who are the host of the party, at the same time, you're also still trying to be honored. You're also trying to enjoy that moment. So there's always a lot happening. And I ask myself, is it actually worth this? Also, there's some people that really don't know you well enough to know what you're going through. But these are the people that will also approach you and ask you questions about what's happening in your life. And they kind of expect you to be answerable to whatever they're asking you. But it only happens at the party. Like, why don't you ask me like days before? Why don't you ask me a couple of months ago? Like, why don't you even like check up on me? But then you see me at the party, you want to ask me 1,001 questions and you expect me to have answers for you. And that's where I also get to gauge you. They kind of gauge your economic status. and see if you've moved up in life or if you're still where you used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so many things happening where it just defeats the purpose of like gathering for me. And that changed my perspective, aside from the economy of like putting these things together, because they're not always cheap. It's always an expensive endeavor. And I've also experienced like family members afterwards, like ruin the experience from a financial standpoint because they're thinking, oh, whatever money that they were going to use for something else before was what they used to do this, to do that. And now they're looking for another like way to get money. And for me, I just don't know if it's worth the effort of putting these things together. But at the same time, it's like we also have to honor the culture. So, which I think you can still honor the culture, but do it in within your capacity or whatever makes it less stressful or less aggravating for you. That way you've achieved the goal and you haven't gone overboard with it. So it's just that balance of like trying to figure out how to, because I don't think this can be taken away. This is like here to stay because we have embedded it in our culture. And it's something that would not go anywhere. It's just maybe finding ways to still achieve that same goal without like straining yourself or anyone else.
So the way that I think about things like this is I ask myself the question, if doing it in or on the continent is going to cost more than it would doing it here in the US, it does not make sense, right? Because generally the cost of living on the continent is lower than it is here in the US. Right. So if you're going to spend more money to do it on the continent versus if you were to do the same thing here in the US, it is not a wise decision to do. And typically when it comes to these parties and things like that, that's generally what happens. That is not always the case, but generally that seems to be about the case. Now, what you said earlier, I was thinking about it from just a narrow scope of funerals, ceremony, but you were actually expanding the scope to be different types of parties. So that could be things like weddings. It could be other things as well. Birthday parties for significant milestones, things like that. And I think, again, part of it is perhaps I have not yet developed some of those relationships that would help me realize the value in doing it in this particular way. And I'm just looking at it from just purely the financial standpoint and whether or not this is a wise financial decision or not. So that's entirely possible. I think the challenge for me, though, I think is that sometimes the people that are saying do all these things are not going to be willing to put money down to do it, right? So they'll be telling you to do it, or this is how it's supposed to be done. But when you say, okay, you know what? It's supposed to be done that way. How about you put some money down so we could do it that way? There will be nowhere to be found. And that's, I think, is a challenge, right? And I don't know what the right answer there is. I think everybody has to make their own decision. The important thing, though, is this is kind of ties back to some of the investment conversation we were having in our last episode when I was telling you, why do we accept certain things on the continent that we would not accept here in the US? In that case, we're talking about real estate deals or real estate numbers. But I would say the same thing also applies here as well. So that's a really good point. And if somebody who's listening has some ideas or a different perspective about what we're talking about, feel free to send us either an email or a voice note at qafrican@substack.com or biimmigrant@gmail.com. We would love to hear your perspective. But going back to you, KD, what is your thoughts?
I think, like you said, it's like a tough space. It's hard to reach a conclusion. At the end of the day, I think we are all different people. And because we are all different people, you can't really impose what you like or what you think is right on other people because they also think their way also is the right way. So at the end of the day, you have to leave it to, should I say, all man to himself or do what makes you happy.
Yep.
So it's just the balance of it. And I also need to add that I think it happens here too, right? Like we have people go above and beyond to spend here, not only to show that they can afford it, but also to show that they know how to put this kind of parties together. Sometimes it's something that people get to boast about because they want everyone who's attended their event to leave the event with a memory of it being like one of the best events they've ever attended. And sometimes that requires spending money. Sometimes like you're putting a show together and you want it to be like a memorable show. That means you have to put in the kind of investment for either interior decoration, the coverage, the food, the gift items that you're giving out, the things that you do. At that point, it starts to cost you more money, but maybe it helps that person achieve that goal of creating a lasting memory in people's minds, so that, to your point, even if these are people that don't really know him or know her personally, they might end up having to talk about that person because of the event, or maybe get to know the person more because of the event. So at the end of the day, it's a more personal conversation in a way.
Yeah. So when you say that there are people that do that here, certainly I think there are people that do that around the world, including here. But I don't think here it is considered a wise thing to do. I think the difference is that in Nigeria specifically, it's considered a wise thing to do. So over here, like people I would say on a general basis, right? People would say that's not necessarily a wise thing to do. And that may just be because people are a little bit more individualistic, here compared to Nigeria. So that could be one example or one reason for why that is the case. I was thinking about something you said, and I'm going to tell you a story, and I don't know that this is completely true. It's what I experienced, it's what I remember, but I don't necessarily remember all the facts. So this may not be true. I may just be making something up. But according to my memory, so when I was younger, right, I used to be a member of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, right? And we used to have this basically conventions and stuff. So basically, I think it was a full week or half of a week. There was usually once or twice a year, there was usually some big event or big convention where Pastor Adeboye would come to the US and basically lead the Holy Ghost service or something like that. And this time around, they decided to host it at the Madison Square Garden. But it was interesting, right? Because we've been to a few in the past. They've hosted it in different places. This time they hosted it in New York City, Madison Square Garden. It was a very odd event because I think the Madison Square Garden was so much more expensive compared to some of the other ones they've hosted in the past, that we used to have basically free access to the facility. When I mean free, I mean unlimited access to the facility, right? You could show up early or whatever. But because they were doing it at Madison Square Garden and it was so much more expensive, you could only show up at a particular time. You couldn't show up early. And then when the service was done for the day, everybody needed to be out by a specific time. And that was not the case in previous events that had been hosted, not again in different states. So it was one of those things. And that was interesting because there were at least, to my memory, I think 2 or 3 people that came up when they were talking during the multi-day convention who was talking about something like basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is not the case, but basically, can you see us? We're now in the Madison Square Garden. And it's like, is that really the point? Like, the people that came to this event are not necessarily coming here because it was Madison Square Garden. They came here because it was a religious event that holds some meaning to them. And for religious events that hold meaning, they need time, right? Whether it is time to socialize with people they've not seen, right? Because this is also a social event. People come from across the country or even international. Whether it is time to be in prayer and spend time in solitude, But when you're hurrying them in and hurrying them out because you don't want to incur additional cost, then what's the point?
Right.
So that event kind of stuck with me for that reason I don't know the motivation for why it was there. I think one of it was trying to say, hey, we had gotten to this level, right? And I think to me, that was the wrong thing, right? In the sense that if the goal was to create a good experience for your congregation or the audience, in this case, I would say the audience is the customer, right? That's why you're doing this thing. That was not a good way to do it. And I think it's a good analogy for what we are talking about here. And you were saying, hey, every man for himself. Yeah, every man for himself. And that's fine. But let's assume that I was a stakeholder. My answer would be simple. You want to do it that way? I'm fine with you doing it that way, but I'm not paying. I am not paying for that. And if you're okay with that, then we're good. It's not that important to me that you do a party or not do a party. I think what's more important to me is that in the case of a funeral, is that the ones left behind take an opportunity to remember the individual that passed and hopefully use it as a starting point to strengthen the bond among the people that remain. And how you want to do that, if you want to do a mega party, that's okay. If you want to do no party at all, that's okay. So I think that's kind of where my head is at.
Yeah. I think if you expand this further, what this also leads us to is economically, or as a nation, we have actually built ourselves to a position where you want to do whatever you can do to have the kind of means to have a say in a gathering. Either it's a family gathering or a social gathering. And sometimes people do the wrong things just to be able to like make ends meet or to have that excess that they can use as a way of being able to stand among either their peers or their family member or just in a social space. And that takes us away from like the right way to do things, or the idea of like when you try to work with someone, they're either trying to like outsmart you or cheat you because they think whatever it is that they're about to make is not enough for when they have to maybe show up at a place and spend money. So it changes all our perspectives because we're trying to not only make a good living, we're also trying to like show forth in the community or among family or social gathering that we are up to it. Like we've arrived in a way. I don't normally do this, but at this particular gathering or space, I need to show them that I have something. Because if I don't appear that way, they're going to talk about me. And it could also be a shameful experience because maybe they have expectations of me that, he works in a bank, for example, he should be able to do this, but he's not doing it. And I think sometimes we care a lot about that perception that we get from the outside world or from others. And we always want to show for it. It could also be because as a people, we are more closer in terms of a community. Like if you walk down a typical street, either in Nigeria or some other African countries, there's a chance that like everybody, family to family, know each other. And you invite each other to like your parties, and you see your neighbor down the streets did their own. And once you have to do your own party, you also want to make sure that you up to par with them or even bigger than theirs. And then it becomes like we all are interwoven in a way that it's hard to just do things in isolation, you know, and it also extends to the point where sometimes if maybe this family is having their event and you didn't show up, they'll use it as a way of saying, well, you're having yours too, we're not showing up. So it goes beyond just like, now it's not just a party, it's just how it makes us as a people, or it affects everything that we do outside of like just the social event itself, to like our families or to our business places. Because there are some families that after the event, it's always going to be fight at home because maybe the guy spent all the money. He was spraying money, forgot himself.
Yes.
And then he gets home and say, hey, Baba Lati, where is the remaining money that we say we're going to use to pay our school fees? And Baba Lati said, I sprayed all the money at the party yesterday, so we have to wait. We can't pay school fees anymore. So it's just that idea that like it affects every other aspect of our activities as a people. And really, someone needs to start like a coaching class or a seminar for what not to do at parties or what not to do if you're putting together a party. And just start to kind of like provide seminars or trainings. Because I think sometimes it requires that level of education. Because sometimes if you don't think through how this affects every aspect of your life, you probably wouldn't see it as a big deal, you know, until you kind of have someone who can shed light on how this like is interconnected to several layers, that you tend to then start to like, oh, maybe I should think twice when I'm about to spend money or when I'm about to put together a party or attend one.
Yeah, it's like So I think there are a couple of different concepts you talked about there, right? So there's the saying, keeping up with the Joneses, which is what you were describing when you said, hey, we're comparing our events to other events that were done by other people that we know.
Yeah.
And how does it compare? And then there's the other part about, I actually just lost my train of thought of that one.
The other part about people who attending and overspending.
Oh, yeah.
Or spraying money.
Yeah. So there's the other part about that in the sense that we're not disciplined, right? So that's money that you didn't like budget for or you didn't save for. It was just something came up and we spent the money that we had and used it for that purpose. And everything that was already pre-planned goes to the wayside.
Right.
And the funny thing about this whole situation is that a lot of times the people that actually are wealthy and who worked for their money, right? It wasn't something that they stole or was given to them for free, are very disciplined with their money, right? They enjoy nice things, but they're very disciplined. It's the people that don't have money, right? They don't have it like that, or they didn't work hard for their money, are the individuals that tend to do this kind of things, in my opinion, right? It kind of goes back to something that I've talked about a little bit, was if you're using Nigeria as an example, there are so many politicians who, when they get into office, start siphoning money from the coffers of the country. But they never seem to be able to siphon enough, right? Like how much money is enough? Because if you had any concept about money at all, right? I'm not saying siphoning money is good. Don't get me wrong. But if you had any concept about money at all, right? You would say, for example, okay, you know what? I've siphoned $20 million. That's enough, right? I've siphoned $5 million. That's enough, right? You would say something. But when you hear some of the stories or the news reports, this is hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And it's like they don't seem to stop until they get out of office, and then they're now being investigated afterwards, and all of these news stories are coming out. And you're looking at the individual, and you can ask yourself, like, it's not possible for you to spend that amount of money,
right?
So I think that's one thing, one could say. You use the word economy a few times, and it made me think about something slightly different from what we're talking about, which is related but different. I wonder how much GDP parties contribute to the Nigerian economy, right? Like, because it's what we're talking about is not unusual. This is the norm, right? Of people spending grand amount of money to do different types of parties. And usually just looking at it from different scenarios, you have to buy the food. Usually they buy some kind of either cow, ram, or for a lot of those parties, they don't buy like pieces of meat, right? They buy the whole animal and then kill it, or multiple of those. So you have that. You have the company that would rent out the tents and the tables and chairs and stuff like that. You have the company that would either provide disposable or non-disposable cutlery and plates. You probably have people doing security. You have the people that are providing the event management or event coverage kind of thing. So that's the video, audio equipment and all that kind of stuff. You probably have a musician or a band playing. So they, and
you
then
have to spend money on promotional items.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. I didn't even know that was a thing. Promotional stuff. I didn't realize. Yeah. But yes, like the flyers and banners, and that is true. I've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
The gift bags and stuff. So you're spending a lot of the money in different ways. So I guess the question is, it would be interesting to see if anybody has done some research or saying how much is this? Maybe we should stop complaining about it, because this thing is providing opportunities for people that would otherwise not have an opportunity or a job if we didn't throw as many grand parties like this.
Conflict of interest. I have an event management company.
So you are one of the people that is enjoying from this types of events, I guess.
Please, let's do these parties. Don't stop.
Yeah. Like reach out to coverme.ng if you want to find out more about how we can help you with your grand party.
Don't stop till we get enough.
No, the other thing I was thinking about too was going to be, and I'm thinking about it from the perspective of not necessarily, well, I guess you can look at it for different perspectives, right? So one perspective is talking about like, birthday parties for like significant milestones, like the 70th, 60th, so those are the ones that people tend to like 40, 50. I mean, they celebrate those round numbers, right? So, they celebrate them a lot, but also like even funerals, right? One of the things I was thinking about too was, hey, maybe it would be wise to have a plan for your own either birthday party or funeral, right? So it's not, in the case of the example that we started this podcast episode with, it is not that the family is getting together to kind of figure out what are we going to do. It is that the person who is deceased has already laid out, this is what I want to happen and this is the money to go do it, right? You're not imposing that burden, let's call it that, on somebody else. Right. And then it also eliminates all the stakeholders coming out of the woodwork and saying this is how you should do this or this is how to do that, because the person has clearly laid out, this is what I want you guys to do. And this is the money to do it. Right. That's not something that's unusual here in the US, where some people have funeral insurance, or some people have their own money that they've saved and says, this is what I want you to do. And I think that could be a wise thing to do, in the sense of, no matter how much money you are spending money that you had saved and budgeted for that particular event. So that's okay. Versus having to have your dependents or, your kids or your family members have to bear that burden for something that was not previously planned.
And the flip side to that too is, like, if it's a burial, even if the person planned, the people that person left behind could still decide, we gotta go overboard with this. Like, we have to close 10 streets down. We have to do this and do that beyond whatever that person planned. And he's not going to be there to stop them because it's gone. So it's a dynamic.
Yeah, you're right that they could decide to do whatever they want. And that's okay. I think I was looking at it from the perspective of, if people didn't have the money, right? Because generally, I would say that most people are not thinking that someone's going to die. Right. So they're not necessarily saving money to say, hey, there's the money that's going to go into someone's burial. And if I found out, for example, that XYZ person already had a plan and they had money to facilitate that plan, I probably won't be too bothered about not spending any money to support the event, right? Because it's already laid out. So yeah, at least it gives out the option. I don't know that it would work, which is your point. Like, Nigerians may still be interested in doing their grand party regardless, but I think it could be a factor as well.
Correct. So this is taking us to our next topic, or you still have some things to say on this?
No, I don't. Please proceed.
Yeah, I think the second one was something you mentioned regarding healthcare and how it's perceived, and the approach as Africans to healthcare here in the US or in diaspora generally, versus how it was for us back home. Because back home, we don't, I think we have the facility for that, but it's not available to everyone. And typically, you don't even think about trying to go to a doctor for a checkup or anything. We only want to do that if we have some sickness, or you're not feeling too good and you decide, I just want to go to a pharmacist or go to a doctor to do a checkup to see what's happening. Not before, not if you're not feeling anything. And I think that translates, or it's been transferred to where we are in diaspora, where even though there's insurance, and for the most part, it covers the bill for doing these things, you don't have to pay. At the end of the day, you're still like, I don't want to go there because it might open up some things that I'm not interested in, or I will start to find things that I didn't think was there before. And then that creates like a whole new path for journey. So it's a balance of like two worlds. And I think this really would apply to like people who migrated versus like people who were born here and they've never been home or lived home. So there's a conversation of two worlds in a way.
So you bring up a few points there, right? So in Nigeria specifically, right, if you had a health issue, what most people did, and when I mean most people, I would mean middle class people, would do is they would go to the pharmacist, or go to the pharmacy and go talk to the pharmacy. And I think that leads to a whole lot of problems, because these pharmacists, I don't know whether or not they're real pharmacists. That's number one. I don't really get to see their credentials. But number two is that
the guy has a certificate on the wall.
But number two is that these are not medical doctors, right? It is unheard of for us here in the US to go to a pharmacist to basically diagnose what's wrong with us, right?
Correct.
Like we tend to, in my opinion, extend the authority of a pharmacist in Nigeria compared to what they are authorized to do academically. That's the first thing. The second thing too is that it's very rare. And I think there's this situation where perhaps we as Nigerians, right, we have this tendency to be overconfident, right? We don't want to say we don't know, right? So it's very rare if you went to this pharmacist that they will tell you they don't know. So you have somebody who comes into this pharmacy and maybe the pharmacist in this case, or the person that's sitting behind the counter, who may not even be a pharmacist, recommends certain medication because they're trying to sell. That's what their job is, right? To sell medication and misdiagnoses the person and provides them with the wrong medication, right? One of the things we don't even talk about was like, are you allergic to anything, right? Or any medication? That's never been said before.
Allergy doesn't exist in Africa.
It doesn't exist. I had this conversation with Stegun once before. And he made this joke, but he was pretty serious when I was talking about it. He was saying the reason why allergy doesn't exist in Africa is because all the people that were allergic died. All right. So,
oh my goodness.
Right. In the sense that his point was, this is something very simple, but because we didn't necessarily have the system in place to address it, all of them died from very simple causes. That's why we say things like allergy doesn't exist. So you have that mindset of you go to the pharmacy, you get the medication or whatever, you go home. Maybe if it's worse, you may decide to go to the hospital. But even in the hospital too, there's not really a good transparency. They say this person is a doctor, but you don't really know if it's a doctor. He may, the way we do things, there's not a lot of transparency to help you understand what the qualification of the person is that you're talking to, right? I would like to believe that Nigeria has good doctors because some of them come to the US or go to other places around Europe and they get hired and practice in those areas. They get retrained in that particular country's system and then start practicing. So there must be a reason why European countries are going to Nigeria to hire the healthcare staff over there. But with that said, for the average individual, the average Nigerian citizen, they don't have access to understand what the person's qualifications is and whether or not this is the right person to be talking to. So when you had that to the whole mindset of, hey, I don't want to go to the hospital because I don't want to be told there's anything wrong, right? Because that's the quote unquote the devil speaking, right? If you are religious or superstitious, that's one aspect that people would say, like that's the devil that's bringing that up, right? There was nothing wrong with you when you were by yourself. Basically, the whole concept of ignorance is bliss. Yeah. Right. So you have this individual or individuals move at some point in their lives from the continent to someplace else that has a more developed and robust healthcare system. And they still bring some of that thought processes with them, right? And that mentality, that's been their experience and there's nothing wrong with that. But they bring that with them and they try to apply it here, right? So one of the things that most people have, part of their job benefits here in the US is healthcare, right? You get healthcare insurance, you get medical, dental, and vision, right? And it's not unusual for immigrants to get this healthcare, which, by the way, they are paying for, right? Because usually you contribute to it from your paycheck and not take advantage of it, right? Because of some of the reasons that we explained. Number one is I don't feel anything. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't feel any pain. So I'm not going to go see the doctor for even preventative care things like physicals or dental cleanings or anything like that. Because if I go there, they will tell me something and it's like, that's when something will start to go wrong. When in reality, maybe if you went, they will find things that early that is not necessarily affecting you yet, but they can address it before it becomes a bigger deal.
Yeah.
That's kind of some of the things that we need to think about and say, hey, just because that is how it is in Nigeria currently, it just means that we're not yet to the point where we have a more developed and more robust healthcare system, right? And we shouldn't necessarily take that as the standard going forward, right? So if you are here, if you are paying for this thing, that's what really bothers me a bit. It's like you're paying for it and you're not taking advantage of it. That is not the right thing to do. Why would you pay for something you're not taking advantage of, right? Go for those preventative care things. If you think there's nothing wrong with you, you're probably right. There's nothing wrong with you, but go confirm, right? And sometimes it's just to get a baseline, right? So that when something does become wrong with you and they start investigating, they have baseline of what your blood tests are, baseline of what your health has been the past few years. So, and it helps them figure out, okay, these are the things that could possibly be wrong. Some people would also say, hey, if I go there, I have to pay co-pay. For most preventative care, you don't have to pay anything. For most insurance, you pay $0 for preventative care. If there's other things apart from preventative care, you have to pay a co-pay. which is a deductible, right? Which is usually a small amount.
Yeah.
It kind of varies from insurance to insurance, so I can't really give an exact number, but let's, for the sake of this conversation, say it's $100. If you're paying $100, usually it's a lot less than that. I think some of them is like $20, $25, $40, whatever. Correct. But if you're paying $100, sorry?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, 25.
Yeah. But if you're paying $100, that is not make or break for you. Right? If you're paying $100 for your health, this is something that is the most valuable thing to you. It's still worth it. So I think you really bring up an interesting point, right? And I think sometimes doing these things, especially as we age, it's good because you begin to do some of these preventative things. You know, you take the necessary scans. If you're a woman, you do the mammogram and all that kind of things. If you're a man, you do the colonoscopy and, you know, and hopefully if anything is beginning to go wrong, they can discover it early and address it rather than waiting to the last minute when you then find out that nothing can be done. You only have 3 months left to live or 6 months left to live. And I'm making some extreme examples here, right? But I hope it kind of gets the point across about saying, if you're paying for those things, take advantage of it. And when I mean paying for it, I mean via your paycheck or via your contribution to your healthcare benefit, take advantage of those things. And then the other part I will talk about, which maybe we can talk about later after you've had a chance to respond to this, would be what about the people that don't have insurance, right? Some people come here, whether they're quote unquote illegal status, or for some reason or another, they don't have those benefits. What should they do? But before we talk about that, let me give you an opportunity to respond to the first part of what I said.
Yeah, I think my perspective to add to what you just said would be the religious aspect of this, which in Africa and specifically Nigeria, even though we believe in science and the importance of science, I think we still place spirituality above science. And to some extent, what that entails is you basically don't think you need a doctor until something actually really is wrong that you can really, really see or feel, or it's obvious, or it's gotten to a point where you then want to go beyond the spirituality of it and just want to go get help. So it's like saying our 911 is the spiritual aspect first before the science or the health aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And so we have multiple layers. Here, you don't, it's hard to I think because the system has always been here, it's easier to just go straight to that. For us, it's this level where if I'm waking up daily and I feel okay, then I don't need a doctor. If my mindset is always a doctor, then I don't believe in the higher power that can keep me healthy and all that. I do believe that times are changing, and with even more religious leaders speaking boldly about the importance of health in churches or other religious places, that is starting to change things compared to the way it was before. But years back, it's always been that idea that if I'm too focused on what the doctor can do for me, it could mean that I'm not spiritual enough. And if I'm spiritual enough, I should be able to just say a word and that thing should go. You know, it means that, maybe you're not doing the right things. That's why you're feeling this way. Mm-hmm. Or maybe someone is trying to attack you is why you're feeling this way. So there are levels to where our mindset is really not thinking a doctor at that point. We're just thinking all the other things that could be happening in the background or in the unseen world before we then start to think of what a doctor could do. And there's some people who've actually lost their life due to that because they waited too late. Mm-hmm. Because then there's some people with their stories, and sometimes it happens now. But the flip side of that, though, is we've had instances where people go to doctors, multiple doctors. They go to general hospital and try to be diagnosed just to figure out what's happening to them. And none of these people could figure it out, but this person is suffering. But then you go to a religious house and pastor, for example, prays for you and the thing goes away. And then you're saying, well, why did I waste all my time going through all these doctors and going through all this exam, and they really couldn't figure it out. Well, all it took was for a man of God to pray, and it's gone. So it's just that balance of like, when is it strictly spiritual or when is it just something elsewise that needs to be attended to? Because even though science has the answer to most things, it doesn't have the answer to everything.
You are correct, especially with that last part, right? Science doesn't have the answer to everything. I'm not sure that I would say it has the answer to most things, because we're always discovering new things every so often. So I would say I cannot necessarily comment too much on the miracle part, right? Because I don't really have a lot of experience in that area. So I don't want to comment in that area because that could be personal to different people as far as what their opinions are about those kind of things. With that said, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, right? So yes, in the scenario that you gave, maybe that is, let us assume that's completely true, and that for an individual, that's fine. But what we don't talk about are the 10 or 9 individuals who died because they did not go see a doctor at all, or did not go see a doctor in time for something that could be easily cured.
Yeah.
Right. And they were going from one minister to another minister to get prayers. And, I'm a little skeptical about some of this anyway, but like a different thing I could bring up would be, especially for Nigerians, almost every Nigerian I know has had an experience, or they've had family members who have had the experience where they were told by their religious leaders that it is their family member that is attacking them spiritually. All right. Like, if it was one off or two off, I would say, okay, maybe it's a possibility. But if everybody's getting that same experience, there's something wrong.
It starts from the party.
From the party.
That's why you don't go to these parties. The person that's going to eat on you is waiting for you.
It's waiting for you at the party. But you get my point, I think. It starts from the party. Oh my Lord. No, but so I think like they're not mutually exclusive. I think is really what I'm trying to say. Like, you could do both. If you want to do spirituality and explore that fully, fine, do that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't go to the hospital, right? Yeah. Combine your faith with the medicine.
Yeah, but I just want to quickly point out, like, there's a depth to me saying it starts at the party.
Okay,
because
go ahead.
Every family enemy is at the party, like a film setting. So everything starts to like put itself in perspective, because in every film you have the villain, right? And then you have like the princess or the queen, and then you have the king. So at that party, the people who are going to like monitor what's happening there will be like, oh, so you are the one that's trying to become the king of this family. All right, we got to do something about you. And before you know it, it becomes an action movie. Something starts to happen to the guy after the party, and then people will say, oh, maybe it was a party that he did. It was too big, and now he's been attacked by the family. So there's a level of exposure when it comes to like putting parties together. And actually, sometimes like you have people from a spiritual side would say, well, don't make too much noise. Just keep it low key, because that person in your family that's been tracking you, they're just waiting for you to like do something big so they can use it as a way of like connecting with their team and saying, look at him now. You see what we told you? So there's just levels to these things. So when you say like almost every family, have somebody, and if it was just one or two, no, it's possible. Like all these families.
Okay, I don't think it's possible. If everybody is having the same experience, it's not possible. And okay, so let's look at it from a few different sides. One side is to say, I don't believe that's possible. I think a lot of it is BS. That's what I think. I'm not saying that there are not people that have envy or jealousy when other people are doing well. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when every single person is having the experience, or have had family members who have the experience that they say it's your family member that's attacking you spiritually, I think there's something wrong. And I think it also causes division within the family that is unnecessary. Life is already difficult enough. I don't need somebody else who doesn't have the best interest of the family at heart causing further division. of the family. The other thing is that even if it were true that the party could lead to different conflicts and things like that, like you said, you can always not go, right? Or you could go and just try to avoid conflict, right? There are ways you could navigate some of these things. It takes some effort, but you can navigate those things. But the other thing too, I would say, going back to the earlier topic, is do both, right? Be wise spiritually, but also be wise from a perspective of taking advantage of medical science for your health. Don't be wise on one hand and be foolish on the other hand. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, which is why the importance of like spiritual leaders also talking about health and advising like their members to make it a priority to check up on themselves health wise is a good thing. And it's been helping. And I think that narrative is starting to change in terms of Africans in diaspora, like making sure that they're taking serious care of themselves, and health checkup and preventive care is important to them now compared to how we handled it in the past.
In addition to that, right? So when you're talking about Africans in the diaspora, right, then this to the second part, right, where some of these individuals don't have health insurance, right? So some of what we talked about earlier doesn't necessarily apply to them directly because of different reasons, right? Maybe because of their immigration status or because of some unique situation that's going on in their lives. I think that we can speak generally, right? We're not medical experts, but we can speak generally from the American perspective. And I'm going to guess that you probably have similar resources in whatever country you're in. You just may need to do some research about that. So one of the things that, it's available in the US specifically is some states have like state-sponsored insurance, or you have like a state-sponsored marketplace for insurance, where if you were making very low amounts of money or lower amounts of money, you get discounts on health insurance that you can purchase for your benefits. Right. So health insurance can be pretty expensive if you're buying it as an individual, but if you're taking advantage of some of these things we're talking about, they become very cheap. Some of them could even be zero, right? Where the state essentially is paying for your health insurance. There are also a number of non-for-profits organizations that help with connecting individuals to health insurance or health insurance resources for people that will fall within categories like this or fall within, we'll call them low income status, right? So these are individuals that do not make that much money, maybe because they're working minimum wage jobs or things like that, and they don't necessarily have the opportunity of getting health insurance at their job. So there are a number of resources available where regardless of your immigration status, you can get access to health or medical care as a whole. And that would include medical, dental, and vision insurance. Kind of find some of those things. I would recommend doing a Google search and look for resources or not-for-profits in your town or state. And they should be able to provide you with specific information that would be helpful for you within that state. Also, you should take a look at the state-sponsored healthcare marketplace as well. That usually has a good sort of information that's available. But in addition to that, right, in the US specifically, you have, by law, if you have a medical emergency and you walk into a hospital emergency care, by law, they're required to provide you with life-saving care, right? So even if you didn't have insurance, but you were having a situation going on and you went to an emergency room, they will still take care of you, right? The stuff is not going to be cheap. They will send you a bill later on that says, hey, pay X amount of money, right? Because I'm not going to be naive and tell you that this stuff is cheap. But the reality of the situation is you don't have the money anyway, right? Because if you had the money, you would have purchased the health insurance. So it doesn't really matter. And they're not going to ask you for money before they treat you. This is not Nigeria, right? Nigeria, they will not touch you until they see money in hand or money that's hit the bank. Here, they will treat you. They will not even have a conversation with money with you until after you've been discharged and you're back home, that they will send you a bill to your house or wherever it is you're staying to say, hey, you owe us $10,000 or whatever the amount of money is. And I'm just using $10,000 as a random example. I don't know how much it would be in your case.
And possibly provide like a payment plan option too.
Yes. So you can possibly provide payment plan option. But also, this is considered medical debt, and medical debt can also be negotiated, right? So you have the payment plan option, to be honest, if you are in a tough spot, you don't even have to worry about paying it for now. Some of them get, you can negotiate. Some of them even get forgiven because the hospitals, because of the law, they know people are going to come in and do this, and they have a certain amount that they probably plan for to just forgive. I don't know what your exact situation is, but what I'm trying to say is that if you need care, especially when it's an emergency, you should not be shy or walk into an emergency room of a hospital. They will take care of you. They will take care of you. They'll provide you with life-saving care. Make sure you're sorted out. We'll worry about the money later, because more important than money is your life, right? And since there are so many different opportunities for how to deal with the money portion, when I mean the money portion, in this case, the bill, like the negotiation, like the payment plan, there are even also resources that will help you pay some of these things. You can sort that one out later, right? So this goes back to the difference that we're saying between here and Nigeria, right? Nigeria, you have to pay first. If you don't pay first, they'll be watching you while you die. And sometimes I ask myself, I think one of the reasons why we're having so much trouble as a nation might be that we are slowly letting go of our humanity because of financing. I can understand us saying, hey, we have limited resources. We cannot waste it. But when somebody is in critical condition and you say you're not going to touch the person until you get funds, there's something fundamentally wrong. And, while I'm having this conversation with you, there's the situation that happened in Ibadan that I think I told you about it because I had to call you to send some money at the time.
Yeah.
Where a young man was basically being beaten to the point where he was bloody all over, had gashes all over his body, took him to the hospital so they can care for him. And the person said, hey, they're not going to touch him until the money has been paid. And I told them, go ahead and treat him. I'll stand right here until you get your money. Don't worry about it. I'm right here. And they would not touch this guy until they got some money. And I was trying to work with you to actually send the money to them. But imagine, I didn't feel that they had a sense of compassion. I'm sure, they probably have dealt with things like this and other people take advantage of the system, and maybe that's why. But in that moment, to see this guy and the amount of pain he was in, and to just say we're not going to touch him until we receive payment, I thought was very cruel, especially since somebody had volunteered that the money will be paid. And I will stand right here until you receive the money. So that's kind of what I think about it.
That's a tough one because on one side, they have to trust your word. And on the other side, they probably had people say the same thing in the past and didn't get the money. It's a bigger issue, I think, because if the government doesn't care enough to enforce it, I don't think the private owners of these hospitals care about enforcing it as well. Because if they do, it will be on their own dime because they're not covered.
Yeah, and I should give them a little bit more grace, right? In the sense that, we don't know what the financial state of the hospital is, right? They may be in a situation where they are barely making ends meet.
Yeah, and also consider that if you do it for one, you have to do it for the other. Like, it becomes a trend. Because the moment you decide you don't want to do it for this other person, then you might actually start leaving bad impression on your current customers and potential customers, because now they're thinking you are actually being sentimental about your health business because they've seen you do it without asking for money for a couple of people. But then when it's their turn, you say, no, I can't do it.
Well, I don't know that I would say, if you're not paying, I don't know if I would call you a customer. But I see your point.
Well, your customer will be in that same hall when it's happening, right? And they will go pass on the message out there and say he has his own clique of people that he helps, and there's some people he doesn't help. Which, again, that's what happens at the party.
You're not going to let go of this party.
We'll talk about everything. It's like we'll talk about everything at the party. What the doctor did, what he didn't do.
But yeah, to reiterate the last point, separate from the Nigeria story that we gave, I think the key points there is if you need medical care, whether it is emergency medical care or whether it is non-emergency medical care, there's probably a resource available. For emergency, there definitely is. Just walk into an emergency room for any hospital. By law in the US, they're required to take care of you. For non-emergency medical care, there are resources available in your town, in your state, that you can take advantage of. And some of it is as simple as doing a Google search to find some of these non-for-profits that have these programs. Some of the clinics, like the community clinics, usually have programs as well. And you can really go in there and get the medical care that you need, even without insurance, for either very cheap or for free. If you have the opportunity to do so, you should definitely get medical insurance. I think that's a key thing that people need to get, because medical debt is real. We don't want to be in that situation if you can avoid it. But if you don't have that, there are resources available that you can take advantage of. And you shouldn't let your fear of money or spending money to prevent you from getting the care that you need. Because money you can always get back. But when your health is gone, you may not be able to get that back. It depends on how you define health is gone. If you die, there's nothing like coming back, except if you're Lazarus or Jesus. But that's a different story.
End of the road. End of the road. Once the life is out of the body, there's no thought about the money anymore.
Exactly.
Somebody else got to pay the bills.
Wow, that's a really good point. One of the things that I would like to actually hear from our audience about would be, for Africans in the diaspora, right? What do they do when their older generation dies in diaspora, right? Are they sending the body back to the continent to be buried, or are they burying them in the country that they're currently in? And what are the top processes that guides their decision making during that process? It would be interesting to kind of hear people's story and how they navigated some of those situations.
Yeah, even though that's another topic for another episode, because I think some older people always make their kids or their family promise them to send their body back.
Yeah, Papa, I'm going to send your body back. Just leave the money down. If you don't leave the body down, you get it cremated. Well, I think that kind of concludes the episode today.
I'm writing you this letter.